It is 7:08. You're listening to 100.5 FM. Good morning. I'm Ray Richardson. Thank you for joining us. We're broadcasting live from the Rowe Auto Group, Westbrook, Auburn studio. You can find out more by going to Rowe's website, 𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏𝗏. And if you want to text me on the DirigoPartners.net text line, you can do so by going to 207-409-6172. Real quick before we get to our guests, I just want to make sure you're aware of this because, well, it wasn't in the media here in Maine today. Several Republican senators were bombarded with body bags, dozens of body bags at their homes Tuesday by angry protesters over COVID-19 relief because it's been gridlocked in Congress. They didn't do it at Democrats' house. I wonder why that was. Wonder if maybe they were just lefty activists with no boundaries, no morals, no ethics, no honor, no integrity. But I digress. Activists hauled the black body bags out of the back of a rented truck and lined them up in front of the Washington residence of, you would think it'd get reported here in Maine, I'll tell you why, Republican Senators Mitch McConnell, James Inhofe, Lindsey Graham, and Maine Senator Susan Collins. Wonder why that wasn't in the newspaper. Just curious. You think if Angus King had gotten a body bag in front of his house, and there were dozens in front of their homes, do you think they would have written about it if Angus King or Shelley Pengree had gotten body bags in front of their homes? Yeah, I'll leave that to you to figure out. All right, let's move on to our guest. Melville Fuller was the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, I believe, for 22 years. I think that's right. I'm stretching my memory here. Born in Maine, died in Maine. Unlike me, I wasn't born here. He was a real Mainer. There's a statue to honor him in front of the probate court in Augusta. But the cancel culture is out. And if you think they went away, well, it's the holidays, they're hanging out with mom and dad, maybe getting a little scolding for being bad little boys and girls. No. The cancel culture is alive and well in the state of Maine. And because Justice Fuller participated in the 𝗫𝗏𝗍 versus Ferguson decision from 1896, the separate but equal doctrine, they think he should just be relegated to the 𝗂𝗏𝗏𝗃 River. But fortunately, there are people in the state who are like, stop, wait, hang on here. He's a great American. He's a great Mainer. That decision, which I think it was 7-1. I got to go look, forgive me. Dee Dee, if you're listening, would you please look that up, the 𝗫𝗏𝗍 versus Ferguson from 1896. I think, for those of you that don't know, 𝗫𝗏𝗍 versus Ferguson, it was about Homer 𝗫𝗏𝗍. Homer 𝗫𝗏𝗍 wanted to ride in a rail car. They made him go sit in the black car. And so they got into a big court to-do. And the Jim Crow people, which were, by the way, Democrats. Let's remind everyone, the Jim Crow people who were, by the way, Democrats, after black folks were freed by the Republican Abraham Lincoln, Democrats couldn't stand it, so they decided, well, if you're going to be free, you ain't going to be hanging out with us. We're not riding in rail cars. We're not going to the same potty. You can't drink from the same water fountain. And good Lord, you will not eat at the same lunch counter. Hallelujah. Yes, that's the Democratic history, but now they're enlightened. They're enlightened. All right. Steve Smith is joining us. You know Steve because he's been on the station before, because he's the attorney that represented us in the lawsuit against Governor Mills. Steve is with Steve Smith Trial Lawyers. And Leah Baldacci, yes, that's the right name, Baldacci. She's the daughter-in-law of the former governor. She is an investigative counsel, legal counsel with Legal Insurrection Foundation, and she is also part of the Steve Smith Trial Lawyers firm. And I say good morning to both of you.
Good morning.
Good morning, Ray.
Did I get any of the details wrong? I was stretching my memory on Justice Fuller.
No, you got it right, Ray. There was a single dissenting vote, although I can't remember if it was 8-1 or 7-1.
Wow, that was pretty good. Aren't you impressed that I actually remembered that stuff from way back? And I wasn't even alive then. So yesterday,
It's not bad.
Steve, yesterday you were arguing. Why don't one of you set up what happened here? Correct me if I'm wrong. The acting Chief Justice in the state of Maine wants the statue removed. Do I have that part right?
Well, I think it's really all the judiciary broadly. The letter was sent from Chief Justice Meade, but it was sent on behalf of the judiciary, and supposedly there was not a dissenting voice, which always should scare you.
So, acting Chief Justice Meade, so somewhere down the road we put a statue up to acting Chief Justice Meade because, well, we do those things. And then someone down the road, long after acting Chief Justice Meade is dead, says, wait a minute, this decision proves this person was unworthy, let's yank it down. Does that seem fair?
Well, it doesn't seem fair. I think what I tried to point out yesterday in the hearing is that there was a recent editorial in the KJ in which a Maine Supreme Court Chief Justice from the 1800s wrote a decision that essentially called members of the Penobscot tribe subhuman. Now, I learned yesterday, after I inquired, that every single justice of the Maine Supreme Court has a portrait hanging somewhere in the courthouse. And it is my now mission in life to find out where this particular justice is so I can invite the Maine Supreme Court to remove his portrait and any portrait of any justice that signed on to that decision. Now, in truth, I don't think that's the right answer. However, that's the slippery slope we're on.
So, Leah, you and I were talking yesterday, and one of the things, I think we would all agree that Plessy versus Ferguson was wrongly decided, just as Roe v. Wade was, just as Dred Scott was, and a litany of other decisions made in the long history of this country. But when we tear down statues or reminders of these people, we also remove the history and the lesson that goes with the history, which is the Supreme Court is not infallible, and decisions get changed. It took 58 years for Plessy versus Ferguson to be overturned when Linda Brown challenged the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, and I believe personally that was the best decision ever rendered by the court. Plessy is among the worst, Roe v. Wade being the worst, of course. That's an opinion, by the way. You guys don't have to respond to that. But Leah, you and I were talking about that yesterday. Give me your thoughts.
Absolutely. I think that it's important for the state of Maine to keep the statute where it is because ultimately we have an individual who was born in Augusta and who rose to the Supreme Court of the United States and became the Chief Justice of that Supreme Court and held that position for 22 years. And instead of seeing that statue as honoring a man who held that spot for 22 years, we are seeing it only through the lens of Plessy versus Ferguson and only through the lens of racism. And this doesn't surprise me at all because right now in Maine, with the Maine Bar is pushing for all attorneys to see everything through the lens of critical race theory. And they are trying to encourage attorneys to see everything through the lens of critical race theory. And they're pretending as though critical race theory is apolitical, and it is not. It is highly politically charged, and it is a radical left movement. And essentially, what it does is it creates chaos where there is peace, and it takes a lot of the strategies from Saul Alinsky, who was Hillary Clinton's mentor, and he encouraged people to agitate to the point of conflict.
Right.
And that's exactly what's happening here.
You actually took on the bar earlier this year and said that this is nonsense, and they didn't like it because people who drink Cosmos with their pinkies up at cocktail parties typically don't like to be challenged by the great unwashed, and they probably consider you that now based on the commentary from so many lawyers as you challenged the bar to think differently about this. Talk about what happened.
Absolutely. When I challenged the Maine bar to consider that racial discrimination was not the greatest issue between and amongst attorneys. The Maine bar, almost in its entirety, attempted to, quote-unquote, cancel me. It was an effort that came from many different avenues, from the law school, from the Maine State Bar Association, from colleagues, from friends even. And unfortunately, the Maine legal community is living in an echo chamber where everyone, or the great majority of Maine attorneys, are a proponent of the dogma from this radical left. And if anyone is, you don't even have to be right of center, you can just be center. They see you as a great threat. And this example of removing the statue just highlights how radical the legal community in Maine is becoming. It is very concerning to me that the judicial branch is coming out and making a statement and saying that this statue is holding or suggesting that the Maine judicial branch is holding out the career of Fuller, including Plessy, as a symbol of the Maine justice system. Why is the Maine judicial branch not seeing Chief Justice Fuller as a man who rose to the very top of our legal profession and recognizing him for that great achievement and seeing him as a Mainer, an Augusta-born Mainer, and recognizing that even individuals that rise to that highest office within our judicial system are capable of making mistakes. I wish that we could see this for what it is and see the lessons that we can learn, that even the Supreme Court of the United States is not God, and they themselves can make mistakes, and that cases can be overturned,
right,
just like Plessy versus Ferguson was overturned.
Absolutely. You're completely right. And Steve, I think you would agree with this. And by the way, Steve, you stood up for Leah when the bar went after her. I talked to you about that at the time. At the time, you were with a law firm where the named partners actually publicly condemned you, which I thought was despicable. But Steve, you stood up for her and said she was right. And this Justice Fuller situation is just so indicative of the political nature of an entity that's not supposed to be political.
Absolutely. One of the moving forces behind us starting the new law firm is the growing recognition that if everything's going to be political, we might as well recognize it. But we're probably something like 90+% of the lawyers in the state of Maine are very liberal. Not just a little liberal, but very liberal. And 10% of the lawyers or less are center-right. And we thought that rather than educating people about sending their dollars to Portland law firms or to Sarah Gideon's husband's law firm, that people might want to know that they had a choice and send their legal needs to somebody that shares their values.
That's the sermon I preach every day. Roe Ford sponsors this studio. I say to people every single day, you should buy your car or truck, new or used, from Roe, because Roe shares your values. Why give your money to people who work against you every day? And Steve, that's such a great point, and I'm glad you're standing up, because you now are giving people a very clear opportunity to stand with you. And I have always believed, and this show is a grand example of it, now in its 17th year, that if you give people the opportunity to stand with you, they will do it. You're supposed to swing hard at that one.
Amen.
Well, I am glad you two are fighting this fight. You know, this is the kind of thing that snowballs. And if we're all defined by the very worst thing we ever did, then none of us will be worthy of anything, because we're all flawed We all make mistakes. We all do things maybe in hindsight we wouldn't have done if the circumstances were different. And I think for the Maine Supreme Court, the law court, to define Chief Justice Fuller by 𝗪𝗠𝗟 versus Ferguson and not look at the totality of his 22 years on the nation's highest court is absurd. And what it should tell every citizen listening right now is that the Maine law court is absolutely as political as the Maine legislature and Governor Janet Mills.
Ray, do you have time for me to poke fun at the New York Times?
Go right ahead. Yes, absolutely. I love that. Go ahead.
So, one thing I did not know till yesterday, and somebody brought it up, was 𝗪𝗠🬬 versus Ferguson at the time it was issued was so unremarkable that the New York Times announced the outcome in the railroad news section of the paper.
That's astonishing. When you consider its significance in American history, that's astonishing. And what you just said, Steve, puts that decision in context of the times. Doesn't mean that it was right. Doesn't mean that it was right, but it does put it in the context of the times. And let's remind everybody just two things, just because I like to do this. One, 𝗪𝗠𝗟 versus Ferguson was pushed by Democrats, and two, Chief Justice Fuller was a Democrat. Just so we're all clear in front of God and everybody. Just because I like to be political too.
And absolutely worked against the party of Abraham Lincoln on a variety of fronts, not just racial.
Right. No question about it. But that does not mean that his work should be denied or that his work should be abolished, because in 2020 we have a cancel culture in the state of Maine and around the country who seeks to destroy everything that's ever mattered in this country. Hey guys, we do have to run. 𝗪𝗏𝗪𝗚𝗍𝗪, Steve Smith, thank you for what you're doing. Congratulations on the new firm, and I look forward to having both of you back on going forward. Maybe we could do this regularly because there are so many issues we need to talk about.
Great.
Thanks,
Look forward to it.
Thanks, Ray. I love that.
All right, guys. Hey, Merry Christmas to you, and I'm sure we'll talk soon. We have got to run. It is 7:26.